G'day ladies and gents, and welcome to DCS World with Mags, and welcome aboard the Ka-50 Black Shark. So I'm not going to be talking a whole lot today, as most of you are aware I've got a bit of an issue with my voice at the moment. But I can't fly this thing out without actually saying a few things on it. Now, this is going to be a non-combat fly out. The first thing I need to say with the Ka-50 is it is a bloody complex machine. It really is. Have a look around the inside of this cockpit. You see all these switches? This is a fully interactive cockpit. Everything in here does something, and everything in here needs to be bound. The weapon systems on this thing, the only aircraft in the game that has a more complicated weapon system than the Ka-50 is the A-10C module. Now, why the Ka-50 is incredibly complex to do combat in, interestingly enough, it's not that hard to fly. It's an aircraft that you get very used to very quickly. Doing extremely tight, very close range maneuvers in this thing at low altitudes it's a breeze. This thing is honestly easier to fly than the Huey is. The only really complex part about it is that systems management and is that weapons control. So we're just going to do some medium altitude flying, just around the airfield. Have a look around here at the moment, just see how quickly you can bring it to a stop and then pivot around and control your area. Just doing a little bit of circle work over the hinds. I'll probably bring the Ka-50 back and land it around about here once this is done. The plan is I'm just going to take a little bit of a look around here, then we're going to go for a fly up to the city that is just to the north of this location. We're going to do some low altitude flying around the city, over the roads and in between the buildings, and I'll show you how this thing can do some pop-up work, and then I'm going to bring it back. Now, the Kamov Ka-50 is the first and only attack helicopter, or genuine 100% attack helicopter, inside of DCS. There is currently only 3 helicopters available in. We have the MIL Mi-8, which is primarily a transport helicopter, but can be equipped in a gunship mode. You have the UH-1 Huey, which again is primarily a transport helicopter, but can be configured for gunship. They're both sort of multi-purpose helicopters. The Ka-50 only has one role. It's an attack helicopter. That's what it does. And it's sort of unique in comparison to some of the attack helicopters run elsewhere in the world. As a general rule, attack helicopters are always a two-person show. You generally have your pilot, and then you'll have gunner Rio or battle captain, depending on the configuration of the helicopter, usually sitting in behind the pilot's position. The Ka-50 is a single-seater. Part of the reasons its weapon systems are so complicated to manage is because you are managing the roles of what in a traditional attack helicopter would be divided amongst 2 people, all on your own. You're handling all of the gunner's duties, all of the radar and sensor, all of the radio equipment, as well as trying to fly the helicopter at the same time. We'll go for a bit of a low altitude fly down the road here and have a look at some of the traffic before breaking into the city and seeing if we can find a good ambush point to demonstrate the ambush capabilities of something like the Ka-50 and how they generally attack. Now, for those who have been paying a lot of close attention to the external shots that I put up before, you would have noticed that the Ka-50 is twin rotor, but has no tail rotor. This is another thing that gives the Ka-50 a bit of its unique design. It has counter-rotating rotors in order to maintain and counter out its own torque while in flight, removing the need for a tail rotor at all. This has the side effect of giving an immense amount of down power on the rotors themselves, allowing the Ka-50 to pull some pretty severe moves and quickly change direction very rapidly. It's kind of crazy how nimble this thing is and how easy it is to move around the sky. Now, your control on the Ka-50 is actually controlled by rotating the pitch angle of the blades while in flight. Rotating the pitch angle causes a differential in the torque generated on each of the rotors, allowing the aircraft to twist left or right based on the torque of those rotors. Just picking a spot to descend into the city at the moment. I'm trying to find an area that will be appropriate for doing some pop-up. can see how easy it is for me to maneuver around these buildings extremely closely. As I said, the Ka-50, the difficulty of this module is nothing to do with how the aircraft flies. The Ka-50 flies beautifully. It's possibly one of the easiest things in the game that I've ever encountered to fly. It's just the weapons management systems. And this area here will do just nicely. So what we've got in front of us is a ridge of tree lines that is just on the edge of town. If I had targets in town to go for, and I could make all the weapon systems on the Ka-50 work in simulation mode, this would be one of the points that I would run an ambush from. In Hollywood movies, Hollywood loves showing attack helicopters going in all guns blazing on a position. The reality is they don't actually do that as often as you would think. What they use is a technique called pop-up. They find a position that they can hide themselves behind, something that will usually obscure their thermal image. By staying low to the ground and moving at very little speed, they have very little chance of actually being detected on radar, and providing they can keep something in between them and the position that their targets would be coming from, it usually muffles the sound of them being here. So in this town, if we had targets coming down the road on the left hand side, hiding in behind these trees, as you see here, would be an ideal ambush spot for something going through the centre of the town. The trees and surrounding buildings would hide the thermal signature of the Ka-50, as well as having all the trees and sound break up and muffle the sound of the helicopter itself, meaning it would be extremely hard for an oncoming vehicle to detect. Being this low to the ground, it's also below most radar systems' ability for you to detect, especially when it's not moving. No, I'm not landing. So we'll throttle up now, and I'll show you the pop-up. Increasing the altitude, at this point I would already have had the laser target designator for the Ka-50 aimed at a particular point up the road. As the convoy passed that position, throttle up over the top of the trees and I would release either air-ground missiles or whatever ordnance I was planning on deploying against the convoy. At that point, being so close to the convoy, you would immediately back off right and use the buildings in the city itself to provide cover against any potential anti-aircraft weaponry that the vehicles that you're attacking may be carrying. Now, if that initial ambush had landed successfully, it should also have blocked the road, preventing the rest of the convoy from being able to move forward. So at this point you would use the buildings within the city in order to maneuver the helicopter into a position where you could set up a second strike on that position without revealing yourself until you were in exactly the right point to hit the other end of the convoy, and you would pop up in and out of the city itself. Now, it's very important you do this, as why attack helicopters like the Ka-50 are incredibly well armoured for a helicopter. A direct ground-air missile, or even just some very well-aimed flak, will take one of these things out. The only thing the armour on these helicopters really truly defends themselves from is small arms fire, and even that can still take down an attack helicopter if it's directed into the right locations on the aircraft. So, at least that's how an attack helicopter would run an ambush in somewhere like a city in real life. How does it translate into DCS? Well, I wouldn't consider myself an expert in ground attack in DCS. I've spent most of my time in fighter aircraft. That's why I'm unfamiliar with most of the ground attack systems on aircraft such as the A-10, things like the Black Shark. I've had them and I fly around in them, but I spend most of my time in fighters. From everything I've been told by those who do spend some time in these machines, though, it translates in pretty well. Apparently the ground AI can be rather interesting from time to time. The AI in DCS, it can be questionable depending on its difficulty levels. Basically at higher levels, it's not so much that it gets better, is so much as it cheats. It gains the ability to locate you and pre-target you even in situations where you shouldn't be able to be targeted, and the accuracy gets to ungodly levels. I know personally I've been shot out of the sky in my Su-33 by the door gunner on a Huey before at about 3 kilometers range. Considering I was doing well over Mach 1 at the time, I thought that was a rather impressive shot on behalf of the Huey. But yes, as far as I'm aware, most real-world tactics that you read about will work in DCS on the attack helicopters, up until the AI is set to a difficulty level where it can see you through terrain. You gotta give it to the Russians too, it is an angry-looking machine. Now, while I'm playing around with the cameras here, I'm not actually using altitude hold or anything to hold this helicopter in the right position. All I've done is centered the controls and take my hands off, and it's just sitting there like that with no control inputs. I haven't got anything active at the moment to stabilize the helicopter. One of the other interesting things about the Black Shark is actually how new it is. The Ka-50 Black Shark began its development time and had its first flights in the early 80s, but it wasn't actually introduced to service until the mid-90s. It is a very, very new machine by DCS standards. Normally, DCS has a bit of lag on it when aircraft come out. The reason why you'll never see things like F-35s or F-22s within DCS, at least not anytime soon, is because these aircraft still are in active service and they still are incredibly secretive about how a lot of their systems work. If you want to build a realistic flight model to DCS simulation standards, you need access to that information on how it's flown. It's part of the reason why some of the more modern aircraft are taking so long. A lot of the systems operation is still very much under lock and key, and they don't want anybody building a civilian simulation that's highly accurate around these still in service aircraft. Now you might say, well, what about aircraft like the F-15? You know, they're in game. Well, the F-15 had its first flight in 1972 and has been in service since 1976. It's 20 years older than the Ka-50. Even the Su-27's been in service since 1985. In fact, I think the only aircraft that could potentially beat the Ka-50 in terms of service introduction, being the newest aircraft on the block, is potentially the Su-33 from the Flaming Cliffs pack. But with the Su-33 sharing so many components with the Su-27, technically it was in service for a lot longer than that, just under a different name. Alright, so I'm going to put this thing down around about here. If you look to the left hand side, you would have seen the 3 green lights light up just a moment ago. That was me deploying the landing gear. Just going to position myself down in between the truck and the hind, and this should give us a nice little parking area. Being very gentle on the collective here, I do not want to descend too quickly. Like most helicopters, descending fast directly down is a very bad idea. Vortex ring state is not fun. And touchdown. Simple as that. So anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this brief look at Ka-50 module, just taking it for a bit of a fly out and showing you around its basics. The next time I bring it out on the channel, I'll be sure to actually get it in some combat. Click like if you do, subscribe if you want to see more. Fly smart, fly safe, and I'll catch you in the skies.